Medieval times, otherwise known as the Middle or Dark Ages. It was a time within the period of roughly 476 AD to roughly 1400, and it's in reference of a time in European history that started with the fall of the Western Roman Empire and lasted into the start of the Renaissance. The era was notable for things such as violent political changes, violence in general, religious conflict, and human expansion. To go further into the latter, the era saw the establishment of many modern European countries. And if you're not too aware of the history of the Dark Ages, that's perfectly fine. All you need to know is that history is terrifying and brutal, and there's absolutely no hope for humanity. Today, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone watching, we're going to be talking about the most terrifying things that are found within the Dark Ages, aka the medieval times. I don't know what I'm going to title the video, so don't get confused by it. But medieval times, Dark Ages, Middle Ages, all the same thing.
Because I'm you. No, I'm me. I'm me, he says.
It's not always about the money, Spider-Man. It's about the mix, baby.
Before we fully jump into the scary examples, if you're new here, welcome, and if you're returning, it's good to see you again. Alright, without further ado, let's get into it. Torture devices. We're starting off with the fun stuff. But first, let's go over why people used to torture each other, other than just pure entertainment, because that was definitely a reason. But it was used to gain information.
And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I...
Or for punishing crimes, you know. You stole an apple, well, we're gonna cut your dick open. Or just to enforce obedience. CIA.
American.
Obedience for the government. So like if you didn't believe in my political ideologies, skin him. Or obedience for religion. The two things that can never get corrupted. But again, I also just believe that people were bored out of their minds. Like, they didn't have TV, they didn't have cocaine, they didn't have those weird little bouncing fruit videos. Like, there was nothing to do back then, besides torturing people. Now let's talk about one of the most famous ones that came out of this time. Kind of. The Brazen Bull. Now, I said kind of because it is reported to come out of Greece. The famous story of the creator, Perillus, being its first victim. I'm just gonna look up how to say that. I don't get why people back then couldn't have like easy names like Bob. Bob flew too close to the sun. That was stupid, I apologize. Perillus, being its first victim. The Brazen Bull was a metal bowl that was made to withstand extreme heat. It was hollow, so it was pretty much like an oven. And it had some really cool features. Like smoke would come out of the bull's face, and some pipes that convert screams into the noise of the bull. Oh, what's that? Screams? You heard me right. Yeah, so they would put people in the Brazen Bowl, light it on fire, and then have a little cookout. And then when the people screamed as they were burning to death and dying a slow, painful, horrible death, everyone was like, whoa, it sounds like a bull. What a time. Now, some historians have debated on whether the Brazen Bowl was actually used or not in real life. Some people just think it's a made-up story. However, if you are in the knowledge of how brutal history can be, especially like with torture, I would not be shocked if people actually made a Brazen Bowl or something similar to cook people alive. Because, man, humans are so cool. Also, to back up my point other than just random yapping, other devices during this time are pretty creative. So let's talk about my personal favorite torture device. The rectum spreader, aka the pear of anguish. That second name is the actual name. Well, there's so many terms for it because so many people were using the little butt spreader. But, you get the idea. Now, if you don't, I'm going to teach you a little lesson about context clues. We use the first word called rectum, aka the butt, and then we use the second word called spreader. Now, some people are into that. Now, it doesn't always go in the ass. Like in my case, it will go up the vagina. My mom says she watches these videos every once in a while. Anyway, once it's up there, the fun part begins because it has a little thing where you can unscrew it, and then that's when the spreading part happens. And they wouldn't stop spreading the pussy pear until you broke stuff. And witnesses of this experience have stated multiple times that the noise of bones breaking terrified them. Now, it wasn't just bones in whatever other parts are down there that was breaking, because the pear of anguish was also put in people's mouths. I don't know if they cleaned it after it was up someone else in a different orifice, but I'm almost certain that they would clean their torture devices because, like, this is the medieval times, and people almost certainly knew to wash their hands back then. Or how about the rake? That's a pretty fun one too. Do you ever feel like your back could use like a big old stretch? Or you wake up in the morning and you're doing a big stretch like your dog does, like it pays bills? But you can't get your back to crack or stretch properly. Mine pops, cracks, and Like, I have back issues, and I'm in my 20s. I'm in my early 20s. I like, when I go to the back doctor, I'm in a room full of old people. I have something that will do the trick for you, me, and everyone with back pain. So with the rake, all you gotta do is tie this limb, that limb, and then that one. And I'm sorry if you don't have all 4, but you might be happy at the end of this. You tie your limbs up, and then from the ropes that are tied up, they start stretching you. Now, if you have good friends, they will stop once you say, hey, it kind of hurts. However, we're talking about the medieval times. They didn't do friends back then. Witnesses of this torture say that the loudest parts weren't the screams, but rather the bones and the parts just dislocating and tearing off, and skin ripping. Imagine that. Someone's screams aren't the loudest thing in their death. If any of you have any... I'm gonna do something bad. If any of you have ever seen a Saw movie out of the Saw franchise, you might notice that a lot of traps are inspired by the medieval times torture devices. Besides the kinky pair, I don't recall that in a Saw movie. Hopefully they don't do that. That'd be a different movie at that point. Torture was just one of the many horrors during the Dark Ages. Oh, and also, due process wasn't that popular. Much like today in the... Another scary thing that people had to deal with was plagues. Now, I'm going to go over the epidemic plagues, but we're going to mainly focus on one heavy hitter. Now, if you don't believe in plagues and diseases and shit, good for you. Epidemic plagues means they're the big boy plagues that, like, killed a lot of people. Like, when people say it's big, they're usually lying. So, like, I'm not this time. But I'm also not talking about what I'm in. Plagues included things such as leprosy, the bubonic plague, smallpox, anthrax, and not like in envelopes or anything like that. Tuberculosis.
But you said you knew Spanish.
Scabies, erysipelas, trachoma, as well as some examples of mania, which in simple terms is like a mental plague. It's where many people face the same delusion. One example of mania was the dancing mania plague, where people would dance and then actually die because they kept dancing. And the reason they started dancing was no one knows. They just started dancing. Like a whole village just started dancing one day, and then they started dying from exhaustion. There's a little puppet who can tell you more about it, but that's not that scary. But what we're looking at is more exciting, and that's the Black Death, aka the bubonic plague, or if we're back in those days, we're going to call it the Great Plague. In October of 1347, a ship that came from Crimea and Asia docked in Sicily, and little did the sailors know that they just doomed most of the population of Europe, as there were rats on board that carried diseases, and not just the bubonic plague. But also I want to state that the bubonic plague was seen and prevalent before this, specifically in Asia. It was wiping out people left and right. And by left and right, it's calculated that it took up to 25 million lives in Asian countries. And now it's in Europe, a more populated area. The bubonic plague managed to wipe out 75% of the population, which estimates range from 50 million to 200 million people lost their lives because of the plague. Now you might be fooled into thinking that you might live or that it's just a common cold, mainly because the mortality rate was so vast, as it was 30% to 75% deadly. So are you a gambler? Do you think you're a 30%er, or do you think you're more 65%? Well, if you are in the small margin that avoids the Black Death, then you just have to worry about other things like, I don't know, things that have like a 100% mortality rate, like other plagues that were pretty prevalent at this time, like the pneumonic and septicemic plague. And again, their KD ratios were off the roof, so like you're not winning that 1v1. Now you might be wondering, why aren't we talking about them? Well, what the bubonic plague does to you is far more worse, in my opinion. Okay, Black Death symptoms. From records, you'll experience, and this is quotes, painful lymph node swellings called buboes, primarily found around the base of the neck, in the armpits and groin, which oozed pus and bled. Areas around your dick would get pussy and bleed because you're sick. Victims underwent damage to the skin and underlying tissue until they were covered in dark blotches. Most victims died within 4 to 7 days after infection. When the plague reached Europe, it first struck port cities and then followed the trade routes, both by sea and land. The bubonic plague was the most commonly seen form during the Black Death, with a mortality rate of 30 to 75% and symptoms including fever of 38 to 41 Celsius, or 101 to 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Headaches, painful aching joints, nausea, and vomiting, and a general feeling of malaise. Of those who contracted the bubonic plague, 4 out of 5 died within 8 days. I feel like that mortality rate of 30 75% is a bit optimistic there, seeing how 4 out of 5 people died, because that's like 80% of people dying. So like, whatever. But yeah, I don't want to swell and bleed out of my balls. I bet you don't either. That's why it's scary. And also, it almost like wiped human existence out completely. So that's pretty spooky too. Yo, there's a lot of incest going on in the medieval times, specifically with royalty. You ever wonder why all these guys look so fucking weird in their paintings? Well, that's because they were shebanging their sisters, brothers, mothers, cousins, what other sibling? Yeah, so just imagine how many times Grandpa and his sister were just fucking. And one thing that comes with incest, plagues, not real hygiene care, no real good medicine, and really no human advancements that we have today is a lot of kids died. Like the infant mortality rate was high as hell. Insert high joke here, I don't know. Have you ever wondered why people back in the day had so many kids? And this isn't just for the medieval times. This is until like modern medicine and even like vaccines. Like, by the way, quick break. If you have kids, get them vaccinated for measles, because if you don't, you're a fucking idiot.
Measles cases in the U.S. have now surpassed 900 as outbreaks.
Back to the video. There was so much in the world that would prey on little kids. That sounds way worse than I wanted it to. Kids were not protected medically, so a lot of them just... Now, what the families did to carry on their last name, they would just have like 12 kids, because like 10 of them are probably gonna die, and then the other 2 are probably gonna like look weird. Oh, and another fun thing is the mom and dad only had like a certain window to do this. Like, I'm in my early 20s, and I really need to get cracking like right now, because I only have a good 10 to maybe, if I'm lucky, 20 years left in my life. 30 to 40 years was the expected lifespan of the people back in the Dark Ages. I would be so screwed. I struggle asking a girl for her phone number. If I was living back then, I need to have like 12 kids right now. Like 12 little me's, which is a terrifying thought, because one of them is almost certainly going to be a cut out the... But yeah, kids were just popping out like popcorn in the movie theater, because they also were dropping like flies. An honorable mention before we go into our last example is they didn't have any Little Debbie, that sweet little thing. Finally, just rats.
Let me break it down for you, Mark.
Not so much like plague-infested rats, but just like rats here, rats there, rats everywhere. The rats carried all types of diseases, like the bubonic plague. Now, a lot of people might think, oh, the rats just bit people, or they bit dogs, animals, things like that, and that's how it spread. And that was certainly a way. However, another big way that people got plagues and diseases and stuff was just by eating the rats. Usually poorer people, which was most of the population. And those same poor people were also the people who were more likely to get bitten by rats, because they didn't have beds that could elevate them. They were just sleeping on grounds. And on top of that, homelessness was at an all-time high, which is, you know what, that's also an example of something scary. Homelessness, because that sucks. And what sucks even more during the Middle Ages about being homeless is that on the streets, your roommates are rats that have plagues. So you might be able to see how everything added up to become the quote-unquote Black Death. Also, rats are street thugs. So those were some of my picks of the scariest things that can be found during the Middle Ages. If you enjoyed any of my picks or just the random yapping, then leaving a like really helps out. And if you enjoyed it so much that you think about subscribing, then make sure you do that before you leave. You ever just forget bread at the grocery store even though you had it in your cart? Don't do that here. I'm way too important to do that. If there's something scary that I missed out during the Dark Ages that you think I should have included, whether that be some sort of torture device or a different type of plague that gets more of your genitalia pussy and bloody, let me know down below. Or if it's something entirely different, like all the witchcraft that was going on.
I'm a crazy witch.
Okay, I'll see you next week if you subscribe. If you don't, then I get it.